Be kicked off with the rise of East Asian digital platforms, a critical approach from Dal Yong Jin, who will be joining us online. So Dal, the floor is over to yours for 15 minutes. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm in the in Seoul. It's exactly midnight. So thanks so much for organizing this wonderful event, Dwayne. Unlike previous presentations yesterday and today, I'm going to talk about East Asia as a whole instead of focusing on South Korea, although I'm leading a South Korean media industry team. In the early 21st century, digital platforms have become some of the most significant infrastructures. The emergence of digital platforms has shifted digital culture as they develop a variety of forms of new cultural activities. As you might understand, US-based digital platforms such as Netflix, Google, Facebook have continued to dominate the global markets. However, East Asia, including Korea, Japan, China, has continued to advance digital platforms to compete with American platforms. So by focusing on power relations in the realm of digital platforms between the global north, in this case, mainly United States, and the global south, in this case, East Asia, I advance a critical analysis of East Asian digital platforms. I mainly discuss the major characteristics of the growth of the East Asian digital platforms with OTT platforms to understand whether locally developed digital platforms have become dominant forces in the global markets. Therefore, finally, I examine whether platform-driven cultural flows have resolved the existing global imbalances or expanded the divide. We need to understand the digital platforms. We all talk about digital platforms, but digital platforms can be understood through their computational meaning, which is an infrastructure. But we need to comprehend digital platforms as both hardware and software that allow other programs such as applications and software to run. Platforms are commercial because they give platform designers and owners the opportunity to sell their platforms as commodities. So we are now talking about digital platforms not only as computational functions, but also commercial and cultural values. As digital platforms work as significant distributors, as well as these days producers of popular culture, it analyzed the conflict between local and global platforms in cultural flows. Most of all, East Asia is unique. As locally made digital platforms are major players, unlike other regions. Korea has advanced digital platforms, including smartphones, internet portals, and instant mobile messengers. For example, in Korea, a few digital platforms such as Naver and Daum, as the two largest local platforms, control 85% of the domestic market, which is the unprecedented in other places. Chinese platforms, including Baidu, QQ, and Weibo, have also become national leaders, competing with US-based platforms. Japan has continued to advance its the game consoles, including Nintendo, and developed a line, the mobile messenger. Because of the emergence of East Asian digital platforms, one might claim that the arrival of a few Western, non-Western countries as major players in the platform market balances out asymmetrical power relations. What I think about is whether these countries' growth in the realm of digital platforms is good enough to challenge American dominance in East Asia and elsewhere. In terms of power relations between local and global OTT platforms, we may use one particular example, Squid Game. In 2021, Squid Game, as the Netflix's original series, became globally popular. Netflix gains massive profits because it maximizes its benefits through the monopolization of intellectual property and the distribution channel. Uh, Netflix allows subscribers to watch television shows and movies on their personal computers and later smartphones. This implies that digital platforms have some common thing, some important things in common, including the use of ICTs to facilitate interactions between users, the collections and the use of data about those interactions. Netflix dramatically impacts the entire value chain in the cultural industries. Netflix has continued to diversify its global markets, in particular countries in East Asia, other than China and North Korea. Netflix entered Japan in 2015 and Korea in 2016, gaining a tangible presence in most Asian countries. Netflix kept getting more extensive in terms of the number of subscribers and the revenues. In Korea, actually, local OTT platforms have attempted to increase their market share and the influence against Netflix and Disney Plus. In Korea, a few OTT the service corporations, including 옥수수, Pu, and the Tibing, have been major actors until recent years. Due to Netflix's soaring market share, these local OTT platforms decided to merge Pug and 옥수수, which established a new service in the platform Wave. To take on the streaming giant Netflix, the broadcasters and the mobile carrier launched a unified platform that combines the companies. Wave planned to create its own Netflix-like original content, which means that the new streaming service platform has been highly influenced by the global OTT platforms since its launch. There are several local platforms from Wave to Kakao TV to Coupang Play. However, at least in the OTT service market, Netflix has become a major force in Korea and other places. In addition, the consecutive mergers of local OTTs have brought new concerns, resulting in a lack of diverse voices, which hurt cultural democracy. The local OTT market turns into an oligopoly market as a few OTTs focus on commercial genres. In China, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, known as the best, are three of the Chinese most prominent technology companies. The bad companies are estimated to control over 70% of the internet business and the transactions in China. In Japan, regardless of a few Japanese OTT platforms, Netflix has led the market. Netflix was the leading SVOD in 2020, achieving a market share of 20%, around 20%, followed by another American digital platform, Amazon Prime. Unext Japanese local OTT platform ranked in the third place. However, the other two global OTT platforms made their strong positions in the Japanese market as well. So East Asian countries still cannot penetrate the global platform markets, while American platforms maintain and even expand their dominance. American digital platforms have benefited from the global expansion because they appropriate soaring user bases in order to transform their platform activities into revenue resources. Platform users cannot see the commodity logic underlying digital platforms. As at the end of the day, they play as a free labor that creates economic values. The United States dominates the global markets in terms of both capital accumulation and the spread of American commercial values, such as free trade, free expression, and neoliberal openness. As the end, Steinberg argues, platform interface and hardware device may well represent a renewed axis of American imperialism, as the platform imperialism. An asymmetrical relationship has continued through Naver and Kakao in Korea, Line in Japan, and Baidu and Tencent in China have maintained their role as the dominant actors in the local market. So to conclude, American digital platforms are strong enough to nullify East Asian platforms, their effort, and continue to dominate the global markets. People will continue to use American platforms, and therefore they will be influenced by Western platforms in the future, even though in the concentrated market in East Asia. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Dal. Thank you so much for staying up very, very late at night in Korea to be with us. Just a little bit more for the end of this panel, and thank you so much again. Now we're going to go over to Min Jiang and Xiaofei Han on the shape of platform antitrust in China. Over to you. I believe Xiaofei is going to be leading the slides online, and then we'll pass over to Min. Over to you, Xiaofei.
You all hear me?
Perfect.
So yeah, here's our slides. So hello everyone. Hi, it's
We
great to
see
be
your
here,
slides. Could you
although.
maximize them for us? Wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. So hi, my name is Xiaofei Han. I am a PhD candidate at Carleton University, supervised by Dr. Dwayne Winsett. I'm also a researcher in the China team and the Canada team of the GMIC project. Today, my co-author, Dr. Min Jiang, and I are going to share some of our preliminary findings and analysis we have so far about the antitrust in the Chinese platform economy since 2020. As some presenters have already mentioned earlier, that the Chinese internet is increasingly characterized by a combination of different types of market integration or of a handful of national champions, most notably the BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and some newcomers as well in recent years, especially ByteDance. And the degree of market concentration and integration has been increased significantly in the past decade. The dominant internet companies often take lead in multiple markets. From the data collection we have completed so far for the China team, for instance, Tencent is among the top players in many markets, including gaming, online video streaming, social media platforms, online music streaming, search engine, e-commerce, online advertising, and app distribution. And we could observe the same, quite similar situation for players like Alibaba. And a common way for companies like Tencent and Alibaba to quickly gain, market expansion and the dominance in different markets is through investments, including mergers and acquisitions. So these two charts basically show the comprehensive view of the the numbers as well as the volume of Tencent and Alibaba's investment in different types of companies in the past 10 years. And responding to the almost unrestricted expansion of major internet companies in the past 20 years, recently the Chinese government has flexed its muscles in anti-monopoly, specifically targeting internet companies, especially in the past 2 years since 2020, and it has attracted wide attention. So our research focuses on the state's actions and penalties imposed associated with the anti-monopoly in the platform economy since 2020. These slides here sketches a rough timeline of China's anti-monopoly wave recently. So Ma Yun's speech on China's financial reform and the following emergent halts on IPO to a large degree marked the beginning of the state's implementation of anti-monopoly regulation. And also at the end of 2020, in the state's Central Economic Work Conference for 2021, the state for the first time stated that they need to prevent the disordered expansion of capital, and it was also included as one of the core economic dimensions for 2021. And in the following year, the SAMR, which is the State Administration of Market Regulation, it released penalties for 124 unreported mergers acquisitions that took place between 2011 and 2020 in the internet sector. And also in 2021, the SAMR investigated and penalized Alibaba and Meituan for their abuses of their dominant market position as well as anti-competitive behaviors. However, earlier this year, we've seen sort of the policy turn. For example, in the meeting of the CCP's Political Bureau of the Central Committee, the state stated that we need to promote the healthy development of the platform economy and to provide the support that's needed to standardize and to sustain the growth of the platform economy. And this is considered by many people as some sort of theoretical closure on the current wave of the anti-monopoly regulation. So while there are different types of observations and speculations regarding the state's tightening up over the internet sector, some people even call it crackdown actually, in the name of anti-monopoly law, our project, we want to firstly examine the empirical evidence about China's enforcement of its anti-monopoly regulations since 2020. Furthermore, we also try to provide a more holistic view of China's anti-monopoly action in the internet sector, especially in relation to the existing objectives that the state has set so far for both the internet industry and leading internet companies. And we also ask to what degree China's anti-monopoly enforcement of the platform economy resonates with or contradicts the existing policy objectives for the Chinese internet. So firstly, we begin from the industrial policy objectives set by the state for the internet sector. There are existing literature discussing the often distinctive and sometimes even conflicting goals for industrial policy and anti-monopoly regulations. The anti-monopoly regulations in countries like the US, for example, focus on promoting consumer welfare, whereas industrial policy highlights states' intervention often for privileged groups, actors, or industries in order to introduce structural changes in the national economy. I want to highlight that the implementation of industrial policy is a global phenomenon instead of a Chinese phenomenon. However, in the Chinese context, where the state's role has been significantly and sometimes decisively significant for the landscape of industries, it is very important for us to reflect on the China's anti-monopoly policy and regulations in relation to the policy objectives for the internet industry and how the state would have to balance between the two when potential conflicts emerge. So from the perspective of industrial policy, the Chinese internet bears specific goals, such as to serve as a new engine for national economy growth and also to play vital roles in pushing forward the digitalization process of traditional sectors set by the state. And the leading players that the state has nurtured so far often are the key vehicles in delivering such objectives. And the next part, I'll hand to Dr. Jiang.
Thank you, Xiaofei. I'll continue this theme on the various kinds of objectives China's antitrust regulation of digital platforms are supposed to serve. Besides specific goals or objectives in specific industries and markets, we argue here that Chinese antitrust regulation of digital platforms often serves goals beyond these specific areas. I will outline 3 areas. One is the broader economic objectives, second, social-political objectives, and last, geopolitical objectives. In terms of the first area, China is, in general, very interested in building an orderly market over disorderly expansion. For instance, in the latest round of digital development, the state has set different objectives for the different companies based on their strength. Alibaba, for instance, is encouraged to invest and further develop in smart cities initiatives, given its deep roots in Chinese e-commerce market. Tencent, on the other hand, is encouraged because of their strength in gaming, because of their strengths in entertainment, to encourage to build their strength in computer vision, for instance. So these are different kinds of objectives that the state is orchestrating behind the scene and hoping these large national champions will help them achieve. The second aspect to consider under broader economic objectives is the idea of market and economic stability, which is very important to the Chinese government. If you recall, recently Ant Financial was called off to go public on the US stock exchange just 2 days before it's planning to do so. If you were to proceed, it will be the largest ever IPO in history. Of course, it's related to what Jack Ma said, in public, defying the power of the Chinese state. At the same time, I think there are reasons to believe that if the deal were to proceed, it will cause financial stability in the Chinese market. And in addition to what I think the state was trying to achieve in terms of economic stability, the company was fined $2.8 billion for antitrust violations. And I would like to argue that this is not only related to financial stability in the Chinese market, but also related to broader socioeconomic goals or political goals in China. Lately, the Xi Jinping administration has advocated for what's called the Common Prosperity Agenda to address wide market concentration and wealth gap in the Chinese society. It has been observed that in the past few decades, a large swath of wealth in China has also been accumulated not only to the very top, but also specifically in the digital sector. And it has caused many concerns, and the Chinese government is determined actually to bridge this gap in some ways. And so antitrust does fit into this broader picture of social political objectives in China. And the third point I would like to make here is that market competition has also caused people seriously in social welfare. For instance, a lot of the people working in the digital sector have complained about the 996 work schedule, working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days out of a week. So a lot of competition has come at the cost of social welfare. The last point I want to make under social political objectives is this economic disparity between rural and urban regions, which is not unique to China, perhaps. The state has directed specific initiatives to address this disparity, especially in the case, for example, Guizhou is a very poor province in China and has been given the priority to develop what's called Guizhou Cloud. cloud computing services to raise the economic standard and level of development in that region. And it's not only an economic issue, obviously, but also a social political issue. The last point I want to make is under the heading of geopolitical objectives. As we have learned through the last administration, Huawei ETE will put on the ban list very swiftly by the Trump administration. And there's a lot of talk about what woes it has caused in China because of the Chinese inability to develop in the semiconductor sector and to fit into this broader narrative and project of digital Silk Road. So there's a rising rivalry between China and the United States, the world's largest two economies, but also the two digital superpowers. I want to also emphasize here that antitrust regulations also have extraterritorial jurisdiction. China, for instance, could use its antitrust regulations the same way the U.S. Exerts its power on foreign countries as well. I'll hand it over to Xiaofei.
Thank you, Dr. Jiang. I don't know how many minutes we have left. Just cut me off when our time is up, okay, Susie? So
We have a nice, cozy morning, Xiaofei. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to briefly introduce the data collection for our project. So we collected 124 penalized mergers and acquisitions by the SAMR for the purpose for non-reporting. And these over 100 cases involved only 12 companies, so they're quite concentrated. And Tencent and Alibaba actually took up half of the mergers acquisition we collected. And there are also two penalties for Meituan and Alibaba for their abusing dominant market position as well as anti-competitive behaviors. And at last, we also have a notice in terms of the blocking of a ongoing merger, which are the merger between two leading live streaming platform companies, Douyu and Huya, and they're both owned by Tencent. So I'm going to briefly introduce the mergers and acquisitions here. So we can see actually between 2021 and 2022, the SAMR released a total number of 127 penalties for reported mergers and acquisition, and only 3 of them are in the non-internet sector. And also, first of all these penalties are retroactive. So all these penalties took place in last year, basically. And the mergers and acquisition that they penalized actually took place between 2011 and 2021. So it's like the SAMR suddenly decided to penalize some mergers and acquisition after 10 years later. And the penalties are for not reporting in advance, not for the mergers and acquisition themselves, nor for the monopolistic behaviors of the companies. And the fines are minimal. So each company involved in each case would only need to pay 500,000 RMB, which is nothing, especially given that most of the transactions involve the billions of dollars. And significantly, there is no request from the SMR for any structural changes, so only a minimum fine. Then we use the case of Tencent and Alibaba to show the trend and the direction of the mergers acquisition as penalized by the SMR. So this is the number of unreported M&As for the two companies in the past 10 years. So Alibaba is taking lead in the first half while Tencent is really catching up. And do you still remember the two charts I showed you, which shows the total volume and number of investment made by the two companies at the very beginning, right? So those include some minimal investment as well as investment in smaller companies that did not reach the requirements set by the state to report. So the cases that are targeted by the state are really the major cases that involve big companies. And this is Tencent's unreported merger and acquisitions by sector happened in the past 10 years. So we can see that Tencent is basically expanding to all directions. especially in the content production distribution, and also medical services and automobile. This is the same for Alibaba's reporting merger acquisition in the past 10 years. And Alibaba is moving progressively into the sector of offline retail and wholesale. So I think the map, like by sector, for the merger acquisition actually shows the some sort, to a certain degree, shows the direction of the integration of these two leading companies. And I want to remind you again that those mergers acquisitions are not, they do not have to change because there is no order from the SAMR. So all the fines or all the penalties that these two companies received is only to pay a minimum fine, which is basically nothing for these two companies. So I want to briefly talk about the standards and the penalties for the MAA reporting set in the regulation. So basically, there are two challenges or problems, I would say. So firstly, it really targets the top-tiered companies in terms of revenue. However, this might not be the best solution for the platform economy, because for many platform internet companies, the number of their users as well as their ability of obtaining users are as important as their revenue. So to adopt a revenue based criteria in terms of setting the standards for reporting MAA, it means that they may miss some of the cases that have not generated huge revenue but have enough user base. And the business models for platform companies are rapidly changing, so they could shift to other sectors or start monetization of their user base at any time. And also in terms of the enforcement of the penalties, because in the regulation on the reporting standards for concentration of undertakings, the state actually stated that the state needs to take different measures to restore the pre-concentration market state. However, in all the cases that we selected and reviewed, there is no such order for any structural changes. So all the penalties they receive are of minimal fines. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Jiang again.
Thank you, Xiaofei. So in addition to the cases of fined mergers and acquisitions in the last decade, unleashed, upon many companies, especially Tencent and Alibaba, I'll talk about two prominent cases of antitrust regulation of digital platforms. These involve Alibaba and Meituan. Prominently, they were fined last year in a very exorbitant amount. Alibaba $2.8 billion and Meituan $533 billion. The reasons offered by the decision of the state involve justification for why they're doing so. One is market domination. Both companies have assumed a dominant position in the market as defined by more than 50% of the market in the Chinese terms. And there are also reasons offered in the decision as to their ability to price control the relevant market, and how they are highly financed and technological advanced, that foreclose the amount of competition the government wants to see in these sectors. For the violations, and I think the reasons offered are not surprising to many of us here, involve harms to different kinds of service providers on the platform, to consumers. Also, notably, the Chinese regulatory authorities also pointed out how these kinds of anti-competitive behavior would have an effect on innovation and development in the technology and digital sector in China. Next slide, please. To bring this to a close, I'd like to talk about maybe Chinese case as both an exception, but also the norm in terms of what Chinese government was able to accomplish in this particular area of antitrust of digital platforms. It is unique in the sense that in China, we have a very powerful state, unlike in the West, where the enforcement is very strong and swift. Within a very short period of time, very high-profile cases of antitrust regulations have proceeded, unlike the years of case-making in the West. It is top-down with very little judicial review, and the agency's decisions are rarely challenged. It is very well established and well known that if they were to challenge, they will lose. In addition to sort of the legal procedure we're seeing in antitrust, I think it's also worth pointing out that there are a lot of actual legal instruments at the disposal of the state to regulate in terms of antitrust area. We discussed yesterday media shaming, for example, that can be especially effective. There are also sessions of informal mediation, in Chinese parlance, having tea, drinking tea with authorities and figuring out what needs to be done. A lot of the administrative directive also has to do with industrial policies division of labor, as I mentioned earlier, in a form of sanctioned almost monopoly in certain areas. And the last point I will close on is about this point about shared concerns. Maybe what's happening in China is not such a unique case. In terms of the global trend of ringing big tech, we are seeing the big reversal in some regard to do something in this particular area, antitrust being one of the many instruments. We have seen complaints across the world about damage to consumer welfare. We have also seen a lot of concerns for economic stability, growth, and innovation. If the digital, big tech is left to their own disposal, they will spend all their money for stock buybacks, for instance, instead of doing something to actually develop technologies for the advancement of the society. There's also this big concern about social welfare and wealth gap. In China, the Common Prosperity Agenda is not only to redistribute wealth, but also asking big tech bosses to pay into the system as well. So there are a lot of discussions so far about the global south and global north. I would introduce an intervention here to think about digital global south and digital global north in a slightly different framework. For instance, we have mid-level countries or countries from Africa. Are they, Italy, for example, is it a global, digital global north or digital global south? Even within first world countries in the United States, we also have sectors of digital global south and global north as well. So there are many ways to think about this problem and division of south and north in a slightly different framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, irashaimase Koguchi-san, all the way from Japan. The floor is yours on share of the mobile communications and fixed broadband markets in Japan. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Teppei Koguchi from Shizuoka University, Japan. Today, I'm going to talk about share of the mobile communications and fixed broadband market in Japan. In this presentation, first, I'm going to talk about telecommunications market overview. Then I will describe about mobile communications market and fixed broadband market. After that, I will share you the summary and comments. So I will move on the first section. This figure shows the structure of competition in the telecommunication market in Japan. In the mobile telecommunications market, there is competition between MNO and MVNO. MNO are allocated spectrum by the government and provide services. On the other hand, MVNO borrow networks from MNO and provide services. Services provided by MVNO began in 2001, but today MNO hold a large share of the market. MNO have been NTT Docomo, KDDI, and SoftBank. But Rakuten Mobile, which had been providing services as an MVNO, began providing services as an MNO in 2020. In the fixed broadband market, NTT East and West, originally public corporations, still hold a large share of infrastructure base. So service-based competition is taking place as NTT East and West lease their networks to competing operators based on the rules set by the government. In this section, I will describe about mobile communications market. Currently, the population of Japan is about 120 million. In such Japan, there are about 200 million mobile communications contracts. Almost all mobile telecommunications are cell phone, with PHS being a very small part. As of 2016, the number of contracts was 195 million. So the number of contracts is slowly growing at a steady pace of about 1 million per year. Mobile telecommunications service by MVNO began in 2001, and today there are 1,600 operators providing services. But the total number of MVNO contracts remains at about 26 million. The number of mobile communications contracts is about 200 million, so MVNO's share is only slightly more than 10% of the mobile telecommunications market. Growth in MVNO contracts has slowed since 2020, but this is due to the impact of Rakuten Mobile becoming MNO. This figure shows the operator share of mobile telecommunications. Blue block means NTT Docomo, orange means KDDI, gray means SoftBank, and red means Rakuten Mobile. Each tiny slashed line block is a share of the portion of each MNO's network leased to the MVNO. Therefore, the sum of the slashed line block is overall MVNO market share. The latest figures show NTT Docomo with a 35% share, KDDI with 27%, SoftBank with 21%, and Rakuten Mobile with 2.4%. There is no significant change in market share as the three parties remain oligopolistic. Rakuten Mobile has just entered the market as an MNO and still has only a small market share. Next, I will look at the fixed broadband market. There are currently about 44 million fixed broadband communications contracts. Based on household, there are about 55 million households in Japan, which means that about 80% of households subscribe to fixed broadband. And about 80% of fixed line broadband is FTTH. The number of contracts is increasing, but the growth is very slow and no significant changes have been seen. This figure shows the operator share of FTTH. Red means NTT Docomo. The dark blue above it means NTT East, and the light blue above it means NTT West. The bottom four blocks are NTT Group's share. There has been no significant change in market share, but the NTT Group's market share is slowly declining. On the other hand, NTT Docomo, originally a mobile telecommunications carrier, has started its own FTTH service. and is increasing its market share. So today's presentation can be summarized as this. The MNO have about 85% share of the mobile telecommunications market. Also, there are about 1,600 MVNOs. Their market share is small. FTTH share is about 60% for the NTT Group, KDDI, and SoftBank. NTT Docomo has started FTTH services and is increasing its market share. Mobile communications and FTTH are growing at a very moderate pace. A large increase in the number of contracts and a large change in the market share are not very likely. As for the mobile telecommunications market, MNO still keep a large share of the market, although MVNO services were started in 2001. The original reason for developing policies for MVNO entry was to lower prices and to improve services by promoting competition. But in 2021, the government politically reduced MNO rates. As a result, MVNO are finding it difficult to gain market share, a causality of inconsistent policies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, everyone. So we've heard some very important information. We've seen some data, and we've seen some arguments and summaries and comments from Korea, from China, and from Japan. And just to, as a geographer, I can't help myself situate ourselves in some of the numbers. 52 million people in Korea, 1.4 billion in China, and 126 million in Japan. These are not insignificant markets and insignificant places, even though they seem very far away from us sometimes. So I want to thank our panelists for staying up late at night and for you being with us here today. And I open the floor up to questions for the people in the room, and then I will go online. And also panelists, don't hesitate to ask each other some questions, as maybe you have some regional interests between and amongst yourselves. So first, let's go to the floor. Any questions on the floor? Yes, wonderful. Someone's coming.
Good morning. Marie DeMol speaking. Thank you very much for the great presentations. I'm struck when you've been speaking about the Chinese example. I just keep thinking about the fact that here in the West, we have always been told, do not touch or try to regulate the tech industries because that will strangle innovation. You're really going to interfere with that if you do anything at all. So we have stayed as far away in the West, and as we heard, maybe taken too long, too little effort to control the big platforms. I see in China that they don't seem to have any problem aggressively regulating these platforms. So my question is, do you see evidence of lack of innovation? I've never used them, so I have no idea. I mean, are they not as good? Are they, are there fewer of them? Just, maybe it's an apple and oranges comparison, but just kind of a quick run around that would be really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for the great question. I'm going to go online first. Does anybody online want to answer that question first? Maybe Dal, you've been waiting for a bit, listening to others. Do you have a comment on this one?
Sure.
Great.
It's not the only China. In East Asia, several countries are mainly controlled by the state, nation state. Therefore, there are some conflict or tensions between the public sector and the private sector in the field of the technology. In South Korea, there have been always the tensions between state developmentalism and the neoliberal globalization. Therefore, the one party, emphasizes the government-driven, the development, The other side, the focus is on private, the enterprise innovation. Unlike the Western countries, therefore, at least in East Asia, in particular South Korea, the growth of digital technologies or ICTs has been done in the middle of the sometimes compromise, sometimes negotiation, and other times the control between these two parties.
Thank you. And how about you, Xiaofei and Minshang? You don't have to worry about the mic. They turn it on for you.
Xiaofei, do you want to go first?
I think yeah, sure. I think it's a very interesting question. And also it has become one of the debates that many scholars and policymakers have had in the revision process of the anti-monopoly law, which is, by the way, going effective on the 1st of August, this month, actually. So the debate point is about that in the new version of the anti-monopoly law, in the text, there's actually included in the anti-monopoly law is to encourage innovation. And some scholars disagree because they believe that it might somehow restrict, the scope or the effectiveness of the anti-monopoly law, and it might hinder its purpose because the state might, lose on some cases because the companies involved, they could argue that their behaviors are essential to promote innovation. So I think it's really a great question in terms of, the relationship between the antitrust regulations and the innovation for the tech companies. And also I want to say that many leading tech companies, like I showed in our presentation, Tencent and Alibaba, I don't think they should be perceived as, tech company alone because they have expanded into so many sectors and more increasingly into offline traditional sectors. Like Alibaba is building storage and logistics all over the China, especially in the rural area, and that is very that is very how to put it? That is heavily integrated into local manufacturers, for example, as well as logistics. So I think the definition about the tech company is being contested in the face of their quick expansion. So that's my take on it. Do you want to add something on, Dr. Jiang?
Thank you, Xiaofei. To add to what you just said and also what Professor Jin said, I think there's a philosophical difference and division in Western countries and Western democracies and Western markets and maybe Eastern or Chinese philosophies. That is sort of the assumed separation between market and state, the separation between capitalism and polity. In Western markets or democracies, the market seems so untouchable. Market seems so sacred. You're not supposed to touch it. You're not supposed to regulate it. And it is at its best when it's least regulated. In China, it's not the case. China's government has no problem intervening into the market. It has developed in its own, I think, image, a socialist economy that is trying to address different kinds of not only economic issues, social issues, but also political issues. So we don't have this, assumed sacredness of the market in China. Capitalism can be subsumed in some cases to regulations and extreme regulations. And so I think there's a really deep philosophical difference in how different countries approach the idea of a market. And the second point I want to make, and I think it's a difficult question to answer actually, what's the evidence of this track record of this sort of development? I would point to the West. The start of the internet, for example, is not, sort of the market innovation per se. You could argue to some extent that is a state development it's the state intervention, state investments in these fundamental era apical shifts that actually spurred innovation to some extent. I mean, we can have that debate and argument about that. Sure, the market played a role, but state investment was critical from the very start. So there are evidence, I think, that we can offer to contradict this, particular view of, laissez-faire development model. Of course, this is not to say the state is always right. There are many cases where state interventions can spell and, cause disasters. And China is not immune to that completely. So it's a balance between what the state can do and what the market can do. And China, I think, is trying very hard to strike a balance between the two. I would add this division between urban and rural areas, at least in China, that is, I would think it's actually not unique in China. We see this in the United States as well. So personally, I don't see anything particularly wrong for the state to intervene and say, we need to have some of the digital projects move from supposedly, just urban areas and to the rural areas, giving them a chance to develop. If, let's say, Shanghai and Beijing are really too expensive and too concentrated, can we do something else to help the rural areas to develop their economy and offer them a way forward in this highly concentrated digital economy that we have? And I think it's probably not a Chinese concern, but all universal concern to some extent.
Thank you. Teppei has indicated to me in the chat that he doesn't have a comment to add, so I won't go over to him. I'll read a comment from online, and then I'll pass the floor over to you, Dwayne, for your question. So we have a comment here from Thales Tomas. A comment at the end of their great presentation. Min raised the questions about what is digital global south? Is Italy digital global south? Despite Italy's sluggish digital performance, we have to ask to what extent we can really separate the digital from the other political economic dimensions. The interaction of the digital economy with other industries, geopolitical alignments, and even historical developments might mean that even if Italy or other countries might have less digital presence than China, it still belongs to the group of the West, distinctly benefiting from the support of one another in their positioning with regard to the poor's non-aligned global South. So it's a comment. Does anybody have a quick response, a quick one before I go to the floor? If not, we'll go to the floor for Dwayne's question. Okay, good.
I'll make a quick comment. Thanks, Thomas, for that comment. It's something, actually, Thomas and I worked together on a book project, and we've been struggling with this issue between sort of global north, global south, and assume that there's a natural division between the two, and then in the digital context, it's just more complicated. And I think, our book was also meant to be an intervention in that dialogue about digital global south and north. And so within this structure of, two digital superpowers, supposedly China and the United States, mid-level countries or, bottom of the barrel countries really are trying to position themselves in this universe. And it's not that they can't do anything. And I think there are creative ways. The middle-level countries and the supposedly digital global south countries can intervene. India, for example, is a really interesting case to consider. For example, Indian government is leading an effort to build an open source digital payment system, for instance, right, and trying to offer an answer to this, domination of the Western model of digital payment market and versus what's offered by China, which they don't trust. And so what to do? Let's do open source development. Let's bring the quote unquote digital global south and pull the resources together to develop an alternative to the duopoly of China and the United States in digital areas as well. So there are many, I think, different ideas in this space to rethink south, north, digital global south and digital global north.
Thank you. Dal, I see you're unmuted. Did you have a comment?
Sure. In terms of the global south and global north, we might think about the kind of difference between the west and the east. So maybe 10 years ago, maybe 2 decades ago, the west and the east, they were kind of the binary terms to define some of the rich countries and the poor countries. Nowadays, this kind of binary term isn't the effect because some the areas in even north are characterized as the global south in terms of the immigration and the poverty. Likewise, some countries located in east, now the global south, can be categorized as the north in terms of the economy and digital technology. For example, South Korea is technically located in East Asia, therefore can be categorized as the global in the east or global south. But because of their economy, because of their digital technology, because of their advanced these days, the popular culture, the country can be categorized as the global south toward the north or global south to north. Therefore, it's very flexible. We cannot put the one country into any particular category these days.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Dwayne, on the floor.
All right. Thank you for an outstanding panel and the kind of provocative and evocative lines of discussion that you're developing afterwards, in response to questions and so on. So I think this is absolutely fantastic. Now, I've got kind of 3 questions that are kind of directed for Ming and Xiaofei, and then I've got one for Professor Koguchi. So I'll try to roll them out quickly. So one is simple. So we have this new anti-monopoly law in China, and I think your point, Ming, towards the end about we don't have this veneration of the market in China as if it's untouchable and so on and so forth. And I think one of the things that people here in Canada and the West, if we will, who are political economists, also are critical of the idea of free market fantasies and the idea that the market is this untouchable entity. But instead of seeing the state as the natural and the dominant kind of countervailing force to that, it is the state coupled to some normative ideas about a Republican model of democracy that bases itself, its legitimacy in the cultivation of citizens, the human being, the polis, the public, and so on and so forth. And I think a minimum down payment on that Republican model of democracy, in which we also can use, I think, to establish whether or not what the Chinese state is doing has some legitimacy to which we should defer and actually, appreciate, is, okay, does this anti-monopoly law, does it have an information disclosure obligation, right, to disclose information? That's my first question. And if it does have an information disclosure obligation, does anybody else besides the state get it? Okay, access to that information. Second, are there kind of clear thresholds like the DSA or the DMA in Europe for who's covered and who's not? Okay. And then third, and this is kind of a theme that I'm still figuring out in my head, but really been sparked by everything that's been happening since yesterday morning. Comments started out by Vibod and then followed by Professor Noem, and then taken up again today by Adrian, and now you, and also by Henton, or Anders over there. And this idea that we're seeing the emergence of these kind of diversified conglomerates, okay? And it seems to me that there's 2 paths that this is coming down. One is through what Anders called indoor development, that is these companies, basically, generating new lines of expansion on their own. And another is through acquisitions. And then there's another, and this is the one I want to ask you mostly about. And yesterday, Vibod called this external capital coming into the communication and media industries. Professor Noam noted this in terms of, the role of the Vanguards, the BlackRocks of the world, which, by the way, he reminded me today, Vanguard and BlackRock hold 11 and 17% of the stock in Rogers, which I think is quite interesting and underlooked. But my point, get me back on track here. My question here is the emergence of these large diversified digital conglomerates in China, like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, is it internally driven, by their own kind of innovative strategies through acquisitions? Do we have examples of external capital coming in? Discuss, and then maybe I'll come back and ask Professor Koguchi a question in a minute.
Just 1 second. I'm going to ask if you could, because we're getting short on time, Dwayne, could you ask your question to Teppei-san, please, so that he can think about it and be ready for after the responses. Thank you.
Professor Koguchi, thank you very much for your very helpful and insightful presentation. My question is, why has there been so little change in the structure of the markets there? It seems to me that we have a kind of a policy hesitance. You point to, reforms over the last 2 decades, but still, we have very little change. So if you could elaborate on that when you get a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Over to you first. Xiaofei first. Please, Xiaofei.
Yes. I'm going to respond to Dwayne's questions regarding
Short responses, because we have about 7 minutes left in total, and we want to hear from Koguchi-san.
Okay, cool. So in terms of the way how do the leading internet companies expand their businesses? So our data set mainly talks about the mergers and acquisitions rate, and I think based on the information I collected, which might not be complete enough, but I think companies like Tencent, especially Tencent and Alibaba, they're driven by the indoor development, which means like on the one hand, especially is the case for Alibaba in its market sector of e-commerce. So it tends to develop its own branches and diversify its own businesses. And the M&A, on the other hand, I do not see significant cases involving external capital that motivates its further expansion. So that's my response to that. And I may change my answer later if I have some new information gathered. Thank you.
Thank you. Dal, did you have a response to this question?
Not particular, but in terms of the conglomeration that Dwayne talked about, in South Korea, digital platforms, two in the major Naver and the Kakao became the third or fourth largest companies in South Korea. Previously, Samsung, Hyundai, SK were major players, but these days, the Naver and the Kakao, as the digital platforms, worked hard and to become one of the largest conglomerate in South Korea. These two the companies have more than 200 the companies. Therefore, government is trying to regulate the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Min, for about a minute. And then Koguchi-san, you're going to close off our session just after Min.
To Dwayne's first questions about disclosure, perhaps it's to the discretion of the state as well. So it's not very clear at this point how detailed these companies have to be in terms of disclosure, and that's why we were having some struggles too in terms of data collection. And to your second question about the relationship between state and capital. In China, I think it's perceived that to counterbalance the increasing centralization and growing power of Chinese digital platforms, there needs to be an equally powerful counterforce to that, which is the state. And we have seen this trend, for instance, in EU's regulation as well. Individual states won't be able to do regulations effectively. You have to have a number of states banding together to offer a counterbalance to that very powerful force in the market. And in the Chinese case, I think we can talk more about this, but I do think it's not the the answer to all. But at least it offers some amelioration and alternatives to how we think about regulation, especially in terms of antitrust.
Thank you so much. Koguchi-san, you're going to close off our session today all the way from Japan. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you for your questions. So one thing I think is that the number of contracts has stopped growing beyond the population in Japan. And another, I think, is that the government has been slow to promote competition. But I think it is important point that the quality of service in Japan is quite high, and I think it is difficult to differentiate between the companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And everyone, thank you very much for a great session. We're going to close the State of Media and Internet Concentration within National Markets in Asia. We break for lunch. Thank you.